The night shift clock in Easton Memorial clicked past 2:07 a.m., and the hospital changed its sound.
Oh my God, he's alive!
Daytime medicine is 1,000 voices and wheels, phones and monitors. Nighttime medicine is the warm hum of machines and the soft syntax of breathing. Down in ICU 3B, the lights were low enough to make the glass look like water. Nurses moved the way night nurses do, quiet, decisive, a step ahead of alarms. Lila Reyes, first-year nurse, badge still new enough to shine, stood in the rectangle of light spilling from the med room and stared at the problem that had kept half the unit awake for days. Bed 12. Patient, Mr. Thomas Whitaker, 61. Post-op complications, pneumonia on top of something older, heavier, unnamed. Unresponsive for 36 hours. Oxygen stable but shallow. Pupils reactive. CT scans clean. EEG inconclusive. Family at war with each other and the clock.
"Don't get stuck, Reyes," said Priya, the charge nurse, pointing with her chin toward bed 9, where an infusion pump was chirping for attention. "Fluids first. The billionaire can wait."
"I know," Lila said, moving, even as her eyes flicked back to bed 12. Billionaire was not a clinical term, but it lived here nevertheless, wrapped in whispers. Mr. Whitaker was the hospital's biggest donor, chairman emeritus, the name etched in brass over the wing. He had built this place out of checks and dinners and a certain style of smile, and now he lay in room 12, bones and tubes and silence, while the people whose names never appeared on plaques tried to keep him breathing. On rounds that night, the team had done what teams do when the evidence refuses to be elegant. They tightened the map. Ventilator settings checked, sedation paused, then resumed. Labs sent. Another CT only because the family asked and the hospital could not afford to say no. When the scan returned unchanged, the resident's voice had a little more sand in it. "Time," he said like it was a diagnosis. "Which is what we don't have," the daughter had answered, arms folded like a gate she had learned to lock before she turned 20. She wore a black blazer in a room that had no use for blazers, and she smelled like the kind of perfume that comes with pre-approved credit. Her brother didn't speak. He had Mr. Whitaker's jawline and a habit of checking his reflection in the window. The third child stood by the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets and anger pressed under his ribs. Lila had stood behind Priya, said nothing, learned everything. That fear wears different clothes, that power looks small under fluorescent light, that love sounds like a threat when you think the world is trying to steal your father. Now the unit was almost quiet, and the rhythm of the building felt like a metronome set too slow. Lila silenced bed 9's pump, admitted 2 liters more of normal saline, tucked the tubing so it didn't snag. She charted fast, the way night teaches. She checked bed 7's fentanyl. A tired man with a new stoma grimaced in sleep. She pressed a hand to his shoulder the way her mother had taught her, present, not possessive, then moved back to the doorway of room 12 and watched the old man's chest rise and fall beneath a thin green blanket. "Don't," Priya said, appearing at her elbow with a cup of coffee that you could smell had been burned at least twice. "We can't make him do what his body won't do." "I know," Lila said. Something's wrong, and it isn't the wrong we think." Priya listened, because good charge nurses always listen, and because Lila never said something's wrong lightly. "Go on." "The numbers are neat," Lila said, hesitating. "Too neat. Ventilator volumes perfect. O2 sat like a photograph. But look at his face. The grimace lines here." She traced the air near the patient's temple. "The way his jaw clenches on expiration. If he were deeply sedated, he wouldn't be fighting the exhale like that. Pain? Maybe. But his fentanyl is at 50 and his RAS is -2. Should be comfortable. And his toes, he curls them on suction. He's in there, like he's trying to say wait with his feet." Priya tilted her head, thinking. "You want what?" "5 minutes, Lila said. The words leapt out before her fear could edit them. "Let me do a stimulation check the way my mom taught me, the old school way. Family voice, scent trigger, tactile cues. It's low risk. If nothing changes, we lost 5 minutes and I buy you a real coffee on my break. If something changes..." Priya smirked. If something changes, Reyes, you'll make enemies.
I already have enemies. Lila smiled without humor. They're called assumptions.
Priya looked at the clock, looked at the glass, looked at the nurse who didn't scare easily. 5 minutes, she said. Do it clean. Chart it like a love letter to a lawyer. Lila nodded, washed her hands like a prayer, stepped into room 12, and let the door fall closed behind her. Up close, Mr. Whitaker looked less like a brass plaque and more like a person. His hair was white at the temples in an honest way money can't dye. The lines around his mouth had been carved by a life spent explaining. Lila checked the ventilator settings one more time. Assist control, 12 breaths per minute, tidal volume 500, PEEP 5, boringly correct, then leaned close enough that her breath fogged his cheek for half a second and whispered, Mr. Whitaker, I'm Lila. I'm going to talk to your ears and your nose and your skin. If you don't like what I do, you can tell me by moving your toes. She glanced at the monitor. Heart rate, 84. Blood pressure, acceptable. O2, a straight blue line. First, she said, reaching for a small foil packet in her pocket. She peeled it open and the room filled with orange. Nurses carry strange tools. Lila carried a few coffee sugars and an orange-scented wipe because she had seen scent recall do what orders couldn't. Mr. Whitaker, the Vineyard Gala served blood orange tartlets last spring. You donated the dessert buffet. Remember that? This is that smell. She held the wipe near his nose, counted to 10, watched the monitor do nothing interesting, watched his jaw do the same clench on the exhale. She waited, because impatience is the enemy of miracles and of medicine. Okay, she said. Second. She took her phone from her pocket and opened a recording. The ICU has rules about phones. The best nurses know which rules are about privacy and which are about pride. Lila hit play. A woman's voice filled the room for a moment before she turned the volume lower. Intimate. A past donation ceremony, the chairman thanking staff by name, his voice warm, a little too loud for a microphone. She watched his eyelids for the flutter that tells you the brain remembers itself. Nothing. The monitor beat the same tidy beat. Third, she said, swallowing disappointment because it frightens patients even when they can't see it. She slid her fingers under the blanket and pressed 2 fingertips into the deep tendon of his Achilles, a careful, firm stretch that her mother, 25 years a nurse before she wasn't allowed to be one anymore, had taught her, can lift people up from a strange distance. On the monitor, his heart rate ticked up to 87, then 89. He curled his toes down, a crisp, clear flexion. Sir, Lila said, breathing out, there you are. She leaned close to his ear. If you hear me, if you are in there and trying to talk to us, curl your toes once for yes, twice for no. She waited 15 seconds. His toes curled once. Lila closed her eyes for a second. Okay. She stepped to the wall, hit the intercom. Priya, I need you. Priya entered with her eyebrows already up. Lila pointed with her chin. Watch the toes. She repeated the sequence. Whisper, scent, Achilles stretch. The toes curled on command. Once. Priya's lips parted, then pressed into a line. Locked in, she said, too softly to sound like a diagnosis. Not classically, Lila whispered back. His eyelids should obey. This is something else. He's sedated, but he's not unconscious. He's trying to say stop. Look at his CO2. Priya glanced at the end tidal number, at the waveform flat like a tabletop. 38. Perfect, Lila said, and it sounded like a complaint. Too perfect. Vent's doing the work so neatly his own drive isn't allowed to say. And his fentanyl. Look at the MAR. She thumbed through the electronic chart with the speed of someone who learned to type before she learned to ride a bike. 50 micrograms per hour. Night before last, he was at 25. Who increased? The order clicked open. Whitaker family request for comfort. It read, co-signed by a night float resident Lila didn't know. Patient fighting the vent, the note said. Increased sedation. Fighting, Lila repeated almost to herself. Or signaling. Priya's eyes cut to Lila's. What are you proposing? Sedation holiday, Lila said. We've done pauses before, I know, but do a real one. With family voice, with orientation, with cues, and then... She hesitated, because the next part would make someone angry. Check the pump. It's a Gemini, Priya said. It checks itself. Check it anyway. Lila moved to the pole, crouched, eyed the labels the way you eye a stranger's face. The syringe channel flashed a green light that said, "Everything is fine in the friendly fake way machines say it." "I want to see the back." Priya sighed, then smiled. "Enemies," she murmured. "You collect them like stickers." "Invite the family," Lila said. "Now?" Priya asked, glancing at the time. "It's 2:30. "They're awake," Lila said. "People with money don't sleep through fear. They just buy it nicer sheets." They came in smelling like rain and dry cleaning. The daughter in the black blazer first, Ava, with a face that had been taught to sit still. The brother, who watched his reflection, Michael, with his tie loosened in a way that meant to look human. The youngest, Cal, with a jaw that moved when he kept quiet. "What is it?" Ava asked, chin up so the question wouldn't be a plea. "I need 5 minutes," Lila said. 5 quiet, careful minutes to ask your father a question in a way he can answer. "We've done that," Michael said, the politeness of a man who knows the shape of refusal. "Not like this," Lila said. Priya stood beside her, arms folded, authority enough for 2. "Let her try." Lila spoke in Mr. Whitaker's ear the way you talk to people who have taught the world to listen to them. "Sir, your daughter is here. She wore the same perfume she wore at the gala where you danced with the mayor. She's going to touch your hand. If you feel it, curl your toes once." Ava blinked. Her hand trembled when she took his, then steadied. They waited. 10 seconds. 15. The toes curled once. Ava made a sound like a laugh that had been taught to cry somewhere along the way. "Dad," she said, and said it like she remembered he had once been something other than an asset. Lila turned to Cal. "Ask him if he's in pain." Cal swallowed. "Dad, are you hurting?" He leaned in like he was afraid of the answer and wanted it in equal measure. 1 toe curl. "Ask him if the breathing feels wrong," Lila said. "Cal, does it feel wrong?" 1 curl. Michael stepped forward, forgetting for a moment to perform. "What do you want us to do?" he asked his father. Not the room, not the nurse, not the algorithm. "Tell us." Lila bent and placed her thumb on the pressure sensor of the ventilator's circuit, the part that feels when a person tries to breathe. "Sir, when your lungs want to own the next breath, press your tongue against your teeth if you can. It will make a blip we can see. They watch the waveform instead of the man, because that is what hospitals teach you to do." A small notch appeared at the start of the next exhale. The ventilator delivered its perfect volume anyway, polite, relentless. "He's asking for a chance to speak," Lila said. "We're not letting him." Priya nodded once. "Sedation pause," she said, already tapping into the order set. "We'll step it down minute by minute. Family stays." They did it by the book, because otherwise the enemies you make are right. Fentanyl from 50 to 30, wait 3 minutes, watch the blood pressure hold steady, 30 to 20, wait again. 10. The ventilator switched to support mode in increments, allowing the patient to start a breath and the machine to finish it, like training wheels with respect. The monitor beeped once, as if to clear its throat. Mr. Whitaker's eyelids trembled. His toes flexed twice without being asked, anxious or annoyed. "Dad?" Ava said, voice weathered and small for the first time in the building. "We're here." His eyes opened in slivers, the light too bright, the ceiling not his, the air too loud. He found Ava's outline first because some people live in our retinas. He tried to speak, coughed instead, a dry machine-assisted exhale. "Water," Michael said impulsively. "Not yet," Priya snapped, and Michael flinched back into a world with rules. Lila placed a moistened sponge against Mr. Whitaker's lips. "Sir, blink twice, if you understand me." "Blink, blink." "Are you in pain?" "Blink." "Is the breathing too much?" "Blink." She looked at the pump again. "Machines sing to you if you learn their language." Something about the pitch of the humming changed when the fentanyl paused. A bare, audible thrum that felt like a lie in a crowded room. "Priya," she said, "I want to check the back of the pump. There's a plate, the model number. "Do it," Priya said, which is why people don't leave good units. They leave places where no one says that. Lila slid her fingers behind the pole, found the release, tilted the pump an inch from the mount. A rectangular sticker showed the serial. and just below it, pressed almost flush against the casing, was something that did not belong. A thumb-sized plastic dongle, branded with a company name that had brought integration services to half the hospital's devices last year when the board wanted to look modern. Ava saw Lila's face change and went still in that way rich women do when they are about to choose between a fight and a headline.
"What is it?"
she asked, voice low.
"An auxiliary module," Lila said carefully, "because words in rooms like this can cost jobs. It shouldn't be on this channel. This channel is for the syringe, not the line. It links devices, sometimes to logs, sometimes to each other."
"What does that mean?" Michael demanded.
"It means," Priya said, stepping in, "that an outside vendor added a piece of technology to this pump that can change how it talks to the monitor. If the monitor thinks the patient is comfortable because it's reading the pump's story instead of the patient's, we could chase a number instead of a person." The door opened then, as if the building wanted timing. The ICU attending entered with the night resident in tow, hair flattened by a pillow, expression polite and awake. Behind them, a man in a suit with a badge that always travels first class, the hospital's chief operating officer, Mr. Lennox. He smelled faintly of cologne and consent forms. "What's going on?" the attending asked, then saw Mr. Whitaker's eyes open and froze for a comma before smiling. "Well, that's good." "Sedation holiday," Priya said. "Patient is responsive to commands. He reports discomfort with ventilator." Lennox's eyes slid to the pump in Lila's hands. "Please don't tamper with the equipment," he said, the soft force of a man used to rooms agreeing with him. "Mr. Whitaker is awake," Ava said before Lila could answer. "If she says something doesn't belong on that machine, then something doesn't belong." Lila met the attending's eyes. 30 minutes ago, he was a number that looked perfect. Now, he is a person who says help. This, she tapped the small plastic module with her fingernail, doesn't match the install log. I checked the serial in the device list last week when bed 4 had that alarm weirdness. This channel was supposed to be direct. The resident went pink. "We had a vendor update 2 months ago," he said. "It said it would streamline." "Streamline who?" Lila asked. "The patient or the report?" Lennox's smile did not change. "Nurse Reyes," he said, reading her badge like an indictment. "This is not the time to litigate procurement." "Then call it triage," Lila said. Her voice did not rise. She had learned that quiet is the most disobedient volume. Because if this module, whatever brand gloss you give it, is feeding the monitor a bedtime story, then the vent will never hear the patient say enough. He will keep getting perfect breaths while he drowns politely. Mr. Whitaker coughed, a small sound that nevertheless shut everyone up. He lifted his eyes to Lennox with recognition and something less polite. "Get it off," he said, syllables scraping the dry place where machines live. "Ask the nurse." Lennox's smile cracked for the second time in a building that did not pay him to crack. He looked at the attending. The attending looked at Priya. Priya looked at Lila. "Remove it," the attending said. "Document everything. Page Biomed." "Already did," Priya said, having texted Rivera from night security 5 minutes earlier because nurses anticipate it is what they do. Lila pinched the module, wiggled it free, felt a small resistance like someone letting go, then went to the monitor and switched the vent to pressure support, the mode that listens more than it speaks. The waveform changed. It breathed like a person again. Mr. Whitaker closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, there were tears in them that were not machine-made. "Thank you," he whispered. Ava covered her mouth with the back of her hand and made the sound people make when the world chooses them for once. Michael turned to the window and pretended to fix his tie. Cal steadied himself on the end of the bed like the room had dropped 2 inches. Lennox put his hands in his pockets and watched futures move. "We'll conduct a full review," he said. "Of course. Start with the procurement file," Ava said, and the way she said it told the room who would be writing the agenda for the next board meeting. In hospitals, the difference between a miracle and a memo is usually 48 hours. Biomed took the module, unscrewed it from its own sense of importance, and found what Lila suspected, a synchronization enhancer that allowed a suite of devices to share smoothing data, averaging noise, it said in the brochure, harmonizing performance. The language would read beautifully in a donor newsletter and poorly in a deposition. The review moved the way reviews do when names on plaques might be endangered. Polite, curated, slower than math, faster than ethics. Lennox scheduled a meeting. Ava scheduled two. The vendor sent an apology that smelled like an invoice. The CEO used words like isolated and temporary. The medical director used words like harm and policy. Mr. Whitaker did not walk out of the hospital the next day because stories that are true don't end that way. He stayed. He did physical therapy with a stubbornness that looked like wealth if you didn't know where stubbornness actually comes from. He weaned from the vent the way one leaves a long party, slowly, in pauses, with friends at your elbow. He spoke more each day, the consonants arriving first, vowels lagging behind like guests who live farther. On the fourth day, he asked for Lila. He did it in a voice that had learned humility and the taste of plastic. 5 minutes, he said, smiling with one side of his mouth. That's all I asked for, she answered, and he laughed, then coughed, then laughed again. A week later, a memo went out to the entire hospital. External modules banned from primary life support channels. Ventilators to respond to patient effort over device assumptions. New policy. Sedation holidays with family participation. Documented. Old policy. Pretending perfect numbers equal comfort. Retired. 2 weeks later, a second memo. This one to the board. Review of vendor contracts. Itemized. Donor involvement in clinical hardware decisions. Discouraged. Translation. Write checks for walls, not for wires. Lila's enemies changed faces. The resident who had signed the sedation increase found her in the hall and thanked her without quite looking up. Lennox passed her in the lobby and did not meet her eyes. The vendor sent muffins to the unit with a handwritten card. Priya fed the muffins to security because security can eat anything. At 3:12 a.m. on a different night, in a different room, Lila held the hand of a different woman whose husband was trying to understand pain. She used the orange wipe again. She used the Achilles stretch. She used the words 5 minutes, like a key. It did not work, because sometimes it doesn't. She charted anyway, because sometimes the miracle is that you get to try. Still, something had shifted in the building. Techs began to ask, "What does he want?" Before, "What does it say?" Families were invited to stand close and say the names that stitched patients to themselves. The night got a little less lonely, like good music. One afternoon, as spring pretended to begin again, Lila walked past the donor wall and paused at a new plaque. It was small, dull bronze, installed at knee height where no one important would trip. It read, "For the 5 minutes we didn't steal. T.W." She smiled and let herself be proud for a second, the way women are taught too late to be. Then she turned and nearly collided with a woman she recognized even before the name tag, M. Reyes, RN. 25 years on her feet, one letter in her file that had turned a career into a cautionary tale. Her mother had come on a weekday to avoid attention. "Mom," Lila said, suddenly as young as a girl with black shoes too big. "What are you doing here?" "I heard a rumor," her mother said, eyes laughing, "that some nurse convinced a board to stop treating machines like gods." "That rumor has a good PR team," Lila said. "It was Priya's backing, Mr. Whitaker's clout, luck." "It was 5 minutes," her mother said, "and you asked for them." They walked to the cafeteria where coffee smelled like decisions. They sat with paper cups and a plastic window of sky. "Do you know why I was fired?" her mother asked, not angrily, not like a test. "You questioned a pump?" Lila said. "You wrote that the numbers looked too clean. The unit called it insubordination." "I questioned a story," her mother said. "I didn't care about the pump. I cared about the person under the blanket." Lila looked at her cup, and then at her mother's hands, capillaries like rivers, nails short and squared, a small scar at the base of the thumb from the time a confused man mistook her for a door he needed to push. "I think we won the argument," Lila said. "For today," her mother said. "The other side never sleeps. Fear is a good fundraiser." They were quiet for a while, counting ceiling tiles like nurses count miracles. "Do you want your job back?" Lila asked. "Here, Priya would—" Her mother shook her head at once, smiling. "I have a garden now that does not beep," she said. but I like the idea that this building remembers how to listen. They stood. Lila hugged her. Let it be awkward. Let it be true. On her way back to the unit, Lila passed room 12 and saw Ava sitting on the edge of the bed with her feet swinging like a child. Mr. Whitaker held a newspaper he wasn't really reading. Michael stood at the window, but this time he watched the parking lot instead of his reflection. Cal was asleep in the chair with his mouth open in a way you only let yourself do when you trust the air. Leela knocked and stepped in. 5 minutes, Mr. Whitaker said, pretending to be annoyed.
3, Lila said. Budget cuts.
They laughed the way people laugh when the worst thing is not behind them, but is no longer the only thing. Tell me, Mr. Whitaker said, why did you argue with my COO like you wanted to keep your job?
Because I did, Lila said simply. Because the patient has to be the loudest voice in the room.
He nodded like someone learning a language late in life. I used to think the loudest voice in the room was the one holding a check.
It's the one holding the breath, Lila said. He folded the newspaper. Put that on the wall too, he said.
Months later, when the hospital newsletter wrote about a culture shift in critical care, they used a photograph of the ICU at golden hour, machines winking like patient constellations, and a quote from the medical director about centering patient effort. They did not use Lila's name because institutions don't love protagonists who make their devices into antagonists. That was fine. People who needed to know, knew. Priya, who kept a coffee card in her wallet with the words 5 minutes in Sharpie. Rivera from security, who quietly started logging every vendor badge more like a bouncer than a receptionist. The respiratory therapists, who began to write in their notes, patient trying, as a vital sign. And in a quieter place, in a house with a view of water, a man with white at his temples and a scar on his throat stood very slowly, very carefully, and took 3 steps without an audience. He did it not because it would make a good speech, but because walking is a kind of forgiveness. The body forgiving the mind forgiving the body, the family forgiving the machine. Ava filmed it and didn't post it. Michael watched it twice and didn't send it. Cal cheered and then cried in the kitchen. They told no one, because some miracles are instructions. Keep, repair, repeat. On a night when the unit breathed and the machine said nothing clever, Lila walked past bed 9 and silenced a pump with a finger. She paused at bed 7 and placed a hand on a shoulder. She stood at the doorway of a room where a woman was deciding between staying and going, and said the same thing she would be saying when she was 60, and her badge was dull and her shoes were a map.
I need 5 minutes, she said. Not for me, for you.
And the hospital, which had learned something, made the kind of sound buildings make when they put their pride down and pick their people up. Breathing. Human. A little imperfect. Exactly right. Because the miracle had never been that a man opened his eyes in a room full of cautious hope. The miracle was that someone asked him to. The miracle was that they listened when he answered.